People who have had amnesia and recovered, what was it like not knowing who you were? Car accident. Didn't remember anything or anyone. Have a wife. Found out 2 years later after accident that she's pregnant, have tattoos, ethnic, gay parents. Fast forward 4 years, still married to her. Never recovered my memory 100%. Have 2 sons. It sucks not remembering things from school, past funny jokes, and do you remember when moments. Apparently after the accident, while being put in the ambulance, I had a freak out moment and hit an EMT while screaming, "Who am I?" because I didn't know who I was or where I was. My mom was terrified and crying at the scene. Next story. Major concussion from a judo match. After being accidentally, or not accidentally, headbutt in my temple, I got tired instantly and allowed myself to be thrown to end the match. I walked off the mat, leaned against a wall, and I remember falling to the ground and seeing black as I fell. I remember hearing people say they needed to call an ambulance. Then I feel commotion around me, and I heard one EMT say, "Look, he's not waking up." I feel him trying to pull my fingers back to make me feel pain or something, but I don't feel it. Another EMT says, "This should do it," and I smelled something strong and it woke me up. I don't really remember the ambulance ride except for constantly being woken up by that strong chemical smell, like Lysol or something. I woke up in a bed with a doctor and a man over me asking what my name was. I told him. He asked me what year it was. I told him. He asked me where I was, and I told him my home city. The tournament was 4 hours away from home. He pointed to a man who I seemed to recognize and asked, "Do you know who this is?" I looked at him and I just could not figure it out. I said, No, I don't. It was my dad. The doctor told me I had to give up my career, as this concussion was too big and compounded with others I've had in the past. It was too dangerous to get any more. I was in contention for Olympic training. It was a national tournament. The opponent was Japanese. He was losing by a yuko, not the end of the world, but enough to be scared of losing. I was very honored to be fighting someone from Japan as an American who was competing in their sport/martial art. I always believed it was on purpose. I've competed enough to know he did it in such a way to act like he was going in for a throw. This has given me a victim mentality for many years, which I finally learned to combat daily. Anyway, I've gone off topic. The amnesia was very scary while it was happening, because I knew I should know who my dad was when he asked me. The doctor told me it was going to be okay, and it calmed me down. I regained my memory after a short time, don't remember exactly. First time I've written this story down. I learned that I was still holding a victim grudge about this, and that the fear from not remembering what you think you should is very panicked and scared. I don't know anything about judo. Was that a legal hit that OP took? If so, scary sport. But if not, I feel like something should have been done, no? OP sustained real damage from that, obviously. And I know these sports are going to be dangerous no matter what. That's the nature of them, right? But still, temporary amnesia, not knowing who your father is for a moment, that's horrifying, man. Next story. I've had momentary amnesia twice due to heavy metal poisoning. The first time I was driving home and was only a block or two from my house, in the neighborhood I grew up in, driving a car I'd owned for 5 years. I don't remember what it felt like just before the onset, but I know I was simply driving down the road, no trauma, no real trigger, and I just forgot everything. I was still moving when it happened, so I pulled over and sat. I remember at first I thought I just couldn't remember where I was going. Then I realized I didn't know where I was coming from. It took me about 10 seconds to realize I didn't remember who I was and had no idea whose car I was driving. I turned my flashers on when I pulled over, but realized if a cop came along and asked me any questions, I'd have no idea what to say. So I turned off the flashers and then the engine so it would look like I was just parked. I sat there for about 10 minutes. Strangely, I remember actually being a little bemused, sort of a feeling of, well, this is new. I remember getting a huge chill, where you shake for a second. I also remember being a little paranoid about whether the car was stolen, no idea why. I just concentrated on trying to remember anything. After a few minutes, I remembered my first name, and that seemed to be a key. Or maybe it was just time, as one by one, things started coming back to me. It happened once more when I was in my girlfriend's apartment, where I was living, and was putting silverware away. It felt like I had just woken up and couldn't remember anything. I remember looking at her and thinking she was cute, and wondering if I should talk to her or if she was married. I walked into the other room and saw a cute baby and sat down and played with him. It was my son, but I had no idea who it was. This time, I felt ashamed. I sat and watched TV until my memory came back, but was paranoid that the woman was going to kick me out or figure out that I was just blank. It went away in about 10 minutes. I didn't tell her until the next day. Next story. I hit my head pretty hard on the floor. Bad stunt to impress the girls at school. I didn't lose consciousness, but I have no memories of that day. My mother told me later that it was the most frightening day of her life. I was asking her, "What are we doing here? Where are my shoes?" every 5 minutes. The doctors asked me a series of questions to evaluate the severity of my amnesia. I could remember my name, my family, and my school, but not the date or even the season. During a few hours, my memory wasn't registering any new event. The very first new memory that I kept was the doctors making fun of me after one of my answers. They asked me who our king was, and I answered Leopold I. I'm from Belgium. The next day, my memory was working again, but I've definitely lost track of the accident, and I still have no idea who stole my shoes. Next story. After being in a very abusive situation, I have no memory of the months surrounding and the aftermath that was my ex beating me while pregnant and that causing the miscarriage of our daughter. Eventually, there was a trial, and I cannot explain the horror of hearing friends and family and neighbors testify to what they saw or heard him do to me that I, honest to God, don't remember. When I hear it, my reaction is always, "Oh, that poor girl." TLDR, blacked out a good 8 months of my life to PTSD. Edit. My ex took his own life last year. He was 25. My son is a happy, healthy goofball, almost 8, who is blessed to know no one but my very wonderful husband as his father. Please reach out to someone or rain.org for help if you're in a domestic violence situation. You are not to blame. You're not going to change them. They're not sorry. They will not stop. But you are worth more. Next story. I experienced a loss of events and memory following the death of one of my children. It was 2 or 3 years before I had the nerve to ask my husband about the things I blanked out. I wasn't afraid. I was angry and confused. I consulted my doctor and he told me it would have been impossible to remember every tiny detail of my life during that time. He checked me out and said I was healthy, no stroke, etc. In my case, my doctor believed I was in and out of a state of shock. I didn't forget who I was. I forgot events on and off for a couple of months. For example, I had no memory of whether or not I had been paid during the time I was off work. I had to ask our administrative assistant in private. I can't remember certain conversations or how I completed work in advance for the person who replaced me temporarily. I was told it was partial amnesia due to shock. I had always prided myself on my memory. Eventually, some of it came back. I had grown up knowing that my grandmother had experienced amnesia twice in her life following the death of a child and then later a brother. However, she couldn't remember who she was or anyone around her. I was not as ill. Next story. I'm seeing a lot of car wreck and TBI stories. I suffered acute amnesia after chemotherapy caused me to have a stroke. Everything was in slow motion. Suddenly, I couldn't read the book that was in my hands. Then I didn't know that the object in my hand was called a book. I looked up at my nurse and tried to speak, but they tell me my words were gibberish. I didn't just forget my name or who I was. I forgot what I was. I had no idea that my thoughts were being generated by a brain inside a body. People who witnessed it say I sang the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme song under my breath for days, probably in an attempt to hold on to reality. When I started to regain some awareness, I couldn't distinguish dreams from reality. I thought I was in the hospital after being shot while running away from a drug cartel. The memory was so vivid. I was riding in the bed of a tan truck with a bunch of people, dust was kicking around, and people were shooting at me from the car following us. I woke up with the nurse over me. She was changing the dressing on my port in my chest, and I asked her if they got the bullet out yet. I'd never been to Mexico. She played along. I would ask my family the same questions over and over. My aunt wrote down a list of FAQs that caregivers could read to me when I asked those questions. We did this for days and days until I started to remember things again. Eventually, my brain healed and I recovered most of my memories. I still have a terrible time with short term. Having unconditional love and patience from everyone around me was a great factor in my recovery. OP, it is absolutely amazing that you had supportive friends and family through this time. Can you imagine going through something like that alone? Just having nurses read you things that you don't understand, asking questions, but never really feeling like you have the answers. And this is with no prior, neurodegeneration at all. It just came out of nowhere. A side effect of the treatment, I guess? I hope you're doing a lot better now, OP. Both with the amnesia thing and with the chemotherapy thing. Next story. Not exactly full-blown, but after my father died, I had bouts of randomly losing my memory and the occasional forgot everything. Sometimes I forgot someone I had known for years. I would see their name and go, "Oh, I know that guy. I've talked to him. I have no idea what he's like or how I know him. I just know him." The other times I entirely forgot everything, which happened for only a few brief moments, but it felt so weird to feel. My mind just thought, where am I? I don't recognize anything. What's outside? Who do I hear in this house? And it gave me a really carefree feeling. I wasn't scared, I just knew nothing. I don't know if I could call that full-blown amnesia, though. Apparently there are things I don't remember. My mom will talk about the time we spent with my dad before he died in the hospital, and some things I don't recall at all. It just went blank in some places. But I'm confident I know who I am today, so I have that going for me. Next story. I am in a hospital. I accept that. I see my dad and ask him, what happened? He laughs and answers, you facepalmed during a skate session. I touch my face, feel a big wound under my nose, and ask, did my teeth go through my upper lip? Another big laugh. No, they didn't. Oh, I have a big wound on my cheek, too. Yes, you do. Dad, it feels like I've asked that before. Have I? Yes, you have. Turns out my father had been sitting right next to my bed all day long answering these exact same questions the exact way. It was like a record with a scratch on it. I only remember this scene once. I didn't know what year it was or what time of year, so my father asked me to look out the window if I could determine by the looks of the trees which all had colorful leaves. But I couldn't. And it didn't bother me much. I just thought it was weird. I didn't know what I didn't know, so I really didn't have a problem. It took about 2 days until it got better. I lost about a week prior to the accident. The rest came back. To answer the question of how it felt, to me, it was a little bit like when you come into a room and forget why you were there. You know you should know what year it is or what time of year, but you just don't and can't get it. I didn't panic or anything because I didn't know what I was missing, actually. After time, the memory came back little by little, just as when you remember why you went into the room and have a little eureka moment. Edit. Reading another comment, I just remembered something. They had a hard time taking an x-ray of my head. They would sit me on a stool, tell me not to move, and hold my breath. By the time the x-ray nurse went out of the room, I had forgotten what to do and always got up to wander around. Sounds funny to me, though I don't remember it. Next story. In 3rd grade, I took a pitch to the face at baseball practice and instantly got knocked out. When my eyes opened up, I didn't know what happened at all. I didn't feel pain, hear anything, or think of anything. Apparently, my mom hopped the fence and slid into home to come grab me. When they started bringing me to the van, my hearing came back and my brothers were all there talking about some fair that was supposed to be happening after practice, and they were mad they couldn't go now. It was then that I felt my face and the pain sunk in, and I realized I'm screwed up. Ended up breaking my maxillary sinus bone, part of my eye socket, nose, and cheekbone. On top of it all was a major concussion and amnesia, plus I threw up for a day straight after that. They didn't let me sleep for a few days and used that time to help me understand who I was and where we live, things like that. Eventually it all came back. My mom has basically documented my whole childhood with scrapbooks, so that was very helpful in regaining my memory. The only tough part was going back to school and remembering all my classmates. They all supported me and helped me adjust back into school. I made a full recovery, and now it's just a crazy story to talk about. Next story. Not sure if this counts, but I was in grad school and I was about to take the hardest midterm of my life. My boyfriend broke up with me, leaving me with a 2-bedroom lease on my own after I suspected he was cheating on me. I was studying in the library and out of nowhere, I legitimately forgot how to read or write. I tried to text my dad and looked at it later and it was nonsensical. I called the doctor and was told this sometimes happens when someone's overloaded mentally. It went away after a few hours, but it scared the crap out of me. Not sure if this ever happened to anyone else. Oh, and surprise, I failed the midterm. Okay, but you have the best excuse to fail a midterm, no? You can just be like, oh yeah, that midterm. Well, I failed it because my brain stopped working. Like, oh yeah, fair enough. You just couldn't read or write for a few hours while trying to study? What you gonna do? Next story. With no history of seizures, I had a very sudden and incredibly violent grand mal. Last thing I remember was watching the price tick away on the pump as I was filling my car with fuel. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. Upon recognizing I was conscious, the nurses and doctors began asking me questions. Do you know what year it is? What's your name? What's your mother's name? What state do you live in? This was the typical rotation of questions I received every 20 minutes or so, and for several hours I could only answer, I don't know. However, I wasn't afraid. In fact, every time I was asked a question, I had a hard time answering because every time I said, I don't know, it was broken up with giggles. I couldn't help but laugh. I found it ridiculously funny that I knew what a president was, but I couldn't tell you who it was. I knew what an ashtray was, but I didn't know if I smoked or not. I knew what a mother was, but I didn't know who it was. I was in a lot of pain. The seizure and subsequent fall did a number on my body. Even my fingertips hurt. It was painful to laugh, but I couldn't help it. I started to joke with the nurses about the amnesia and came to the conclusion that whoever I was, I must be a pretty outgoing and jovial kind of guy. I was told that I should be able to answer the questions over time and that my family had been contacted by using my ID and car registration. They were on the way to see me. This intrigued me. Would I recognize them? I became excited. This was quite the adventure. After about 2 hours, I began to get bits and pieces of information. It was like drops of rain sprinkling out of a dark cloud. Each drop had a fragment of who I was, and my mind was putting the fragments back together. Yes, I did smoke. I used to live in Oxford. I was once in the military. Which branch? I don't know. Later realized I'd served in both the Navy and Army. I could finally name a president, but wrong one. I said Reagan, and when the nurse shook her head no, I burst into more laughter, clutching my sides in pain. She began to laugh too. The fragments began to form more linear memories. When I remembered a name, I proudly announced it to the nurse. I had a dog named Raleigh. I know it sounds weird, but I was enjoying this reconstruction of my memory. Each thing I remembered was an exciting discovery. That is, until I began to remember more expansive memories. I remembered my name, and again announced the discovery to the nurse. Very soon after, I remember what happened to my dog Raleigh, and how I had to watch my mother abandon my best friend on the side of a country road. I remembered being told that I was to become a ward of the state. I remembered spending Christmas by myself at age 15 while my family was celebrating a banner year. I remembered that when I was 12, I raised rabbits. How I cared for them, and then finding them all slaughtered one day returning from school. I was told it must have been vandals. More and more memories stitched themselves together, and I began to lose my earlier enthusiasm. A dark form of gravity began to weigh me down, and in the next round of questions, when asked my mother's name, I simply said, Susan. After a while, when my mother showed up, I said to her, "Can you believe just an hour ago I didn't know who you were?" When I said this, I felt a desire to go back to that hour. As it turns out, the seizure was due to a small benign tumor in my left temporal lobe. The amnesia I experienced was due to the severity of the grand mal. I haven't had one that bad since. In fact, I've been seizure-free for some years now. I look back on what happened that day and I recognize it was an incredibly liberating experience. I was a man who was very susceptible to depression. I ignored the bad things that happened to me as a kid. I'm a big, tough guy, right? I also ignored the alienation from my family. Once again, trying to act tough. I became hardened. However, with all my memories wiped away, I found my default personality. I liked being that guy. Since then, I've strived to be that guy. Even though it hurts, I laugh. Damn. I can't even imagine coming back to a state of cognizance from amnesia just to realize that you don't like most of the memories you have. To be completely carefree for that brief moment in time, only to later learn all of the things that were weighing you down. I mean, it sounds like OP had some good takeaways from it, right? Finding the person that they want to be. That's huge. And honestly, not something that a lot of us get to experience, I guess. Anyway, OP, I hope you're in a happier place in general now, and that laughter doesn't have to hurt. Next story. I had electric shock therapy about 3 weeks ago. It took away my memory entirely for a few hours, including my name, speech, and basic motor functions, with gradual improvement since. It's been a pretty mixed experience. At first, I was panicked and hated the feeling of relying on everyone else to tell me who I was and what I should be doing. After the initial shock, it became a fun game trying to remember things and discovering things about myself along the way. Oh, hey, I have a tattoo. Once the magic wore off, it got pretty crummy. I don't remember most of my culinary schooling or job training, which has caused problems at my work. Attempting to relearn to drive a stick shift has been a nightmare, and I've been pulled over twice because the policeman thought I was drunk when I really just couldn't shift properly. I've had to be reminded of friends I've lost, details of my mom's cancer, and general life struggles like bills and how to take care of myself. I'm having to be told who I am and what I should be doing while trying to figure out who I feel like I am. That's just a sampling. Hopefully more of my memory comes back, but I don't know how much of it will, if any. On the plus side, maybe it's a chance to redefine how I see myself. Not sure if that was the point of the therapy, but I guess in a way it's working. TLDR, it feels like I've had to take over someone else's life, and I'm just trying not to screw it up worse than they have. Fake it till you make it, right? Edit. Since people are asking, the ECT was for resistant depression. I believe believe it's also used to treat bipolar disorder, though. Next story. Dissociative amnesia, which was assumed to be a combination of an excessive amount of sleeping pills and PTSD. It wasn't my first rodeo taking that many pills at a time, but I had absolutely no idea why. I spent about a year in the hospital surrounded by nurses waiting for me to make another attempt on my life, while I struggled to figure out who I was and how to function as a person living in a maximum security environment. In my experience, I couldn't remember the people in my life, what my face looked like, or even what ice cream tasted like. I had the opportunity to re-experience life again, and I believe it saved me. I've never taken the time to figure out my past. It just doesn't exist. Next story. One day I woke up thinking I was in the wrong spot. You know that feeling when you wake up in a weird bed on vacation? This time it was a lot weirder. First of all, I was at home in my usual bed. I spent about 20 minutes before I found my way to someone, my mom, to talk to me for a bit. But in those 20 minutes, I had no clue who I was or where I was. I was 14. Next story. This story isn't nearly as traumatic and sad as most of the ones here, but I definitely had a small episode of amnesia. Years ago, I worked for a few months at Lance Foods. I drove a truck and delivered crackers and chips to gas stations and grocery stores. This job was just too much for me. I don't know if I sucked at it or what, but to complete my route, I was waking up at 3 or 4 a.m. every day and working until 6 or 7. With rush hour traffic, I wasn't getting home until 8 or so, several times a week. For the first few weeks, that's all I did. I did my work, came home, immediately went to sleep, and woke up after. After a while, though, I started really needing some time to hang out with my roommates, watch TV, talk to my girlfriend, etc. So I started staying up until 10 or 11, giving myself a few hours of free time after I got home. A few weeks into this arrangement was enough to start seriously deteriorating me mentally. The most obvious example was one morning I woke up and went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. While brushing my teeth, I looked in the mirror and realized I didn't know what I was doing. I looked at the toothbrush and wasn't sure why it was there. I also wasn't sure why I could see a person in the mirror. After a few moments, I realized that I existed and was interested that I didn't know that I existed a few moments earlier. Then I realized that while I seemed to exist, I didn't know who I was. It didn't seem too strange either. I was pretty sure I should know who I was, but it wasn't alarming. I wondered if I should be more alarmed. I went back to my room and looked at my pants lying on the bed. I could tell it was my room, but only because I knew it was my room. I didn't actually have any memories of it. The only thing I remembered at this point was that I had just brushed my teeth. I stood there for about 10 minutes before I suddenly remembered everything. It wasn't piecemeal at all. I just realized who I was, where I was, who my roommates were, and what my job was all at once. I realized that I had to get ready and leave because if I got stuck in morning traffic into the city, that 10 or 15 minute late start could turn into being an hour or more late to start my route. That job was not good for me. I ended up quitting a few weeks after that. A couple years later, when I broke up with my long-term girlfriend, she said that she could tell something was wrong. She blamed that job for breaking me. I don't know if it's true, but I do think about it sometimes. And yeah, not the job itself, but the stress and lack of sleep that came with it. Alright, hopefully this is a fair warning to you all. If any of you feel like your job is eating away at you and something like this happens, maybe hightail it out of there. This seems like you're literally sacrificing your life to do your job. That simply can't be worth it. Next story. It's like what I imagined being dead to be, or maybe not born. There's simply nothing there. Nothing before or after. Being told it was my birthday the first time was meaningless, both in that I didn't remember what a birthday was or even its significance. And at that time, I had no comprehension of past, present, and future events even existing. So the idea that I had been anything, much less something as baffling as born and grown, was useless for a good time. I don't really think of the day that I was born as my birthday either. I prefer to think of the day that I first really started coming back as my birthday. There wasn't even a now I could hold on to for so long. Each moment was never ending, but permanently slipping by. The worst part is that I never tell anyone who didn't know me before. It's a secret I keep because when people know you're different, they treat you as such. Maybe I just ran into some crappy people, but I found my life is better and safer if I keep it to myself. It can be incredibly lonely to feel like I may never make another true friend. However, I have many friends who are almost like parents to me. They've simply always been there and always cared for me. Most people who knew me before say they like me a lot more with my new personality. I really feel like I lost the love of my life, though. I don't know who that person was, really. Just a feeling like I really let down a good friend and lost him forever. I know that if I were still him, my life would be different. I don't know if I would feel better if I were him, but I think I would have more things, and I think the goals he had were great, and I'm sure he would have reached them by now. In a way, I feel robbed because of how much work I've had to put in that I know would have been easy for him to do. I see him in my mind and try to be the way he was. I really want to be as good at everything as he was. On the opposite foot, though, I'm very lucky just to be here. I'm not religious at all, but I am one of the rare people who gets to experience heaven on earth. A new issue for me is I'm just starting to understand how people age. My parents are getting older, and I realize, like most children, that our time together is limited. I would do anything to get more. If I could just have really been in all those pictures I have with them, and had those moments and memories I'm missing, I don't think I would feel like it's been so short. All in all, I can't really recommend nor advise against Amnesia, as I'm not qualified to understand the difference. It is kind of funny for friends to say they like the new you better. It would probably make you wonder, was I that bad? Was there something wrong with me? Was I just a jerk? But anyway, OP looking at Amnesia like a rebirth of sorts is really interesting, because essentially from what we know about the self, if you don't remember anything from the past, it's kind of like you are born again. Like you just factory reset yourself with your current body. It sounds like OP is doing the best he can with it though, so best of luck to you, man. Keep it up. Next story. I got a concussion during a high school hockey game. I was a freshman at the time and went to hit someone who was the size of Chara in comparison to me. He raised his elbow when I went in and my vision got really dark and green. For some reason, it didn't really bother me. I even went back out on the ice for 3 or 4 shifts and scored. It wasn't until I got back to the bench when one of my teammates looked at me and said I was bleeding pretty profusely. Trainer came over and asked me a whole bunch of questions like, "Where are we?" or "What day is it?" He then asked me to repeat a bunch of numbers. Couldn't remember a single one. I had no idea what I was saying or doing. When my dad came over to the locker room to take me to the hospital, my response to him was, "Who are you?" It was some pretty scary stuff. Next story. Not as bad as other people's, but a few years ago, I fell off my horse at a competition and got a concussion. I can't remember anything past leaving the start box. I don't remember being in the ambulance, waiting on it, or being in the hospital. I remember about 10 minutes from the rest of the day, and I fell at about 11. I still don't remember anything. So when people ask me what happened, if it hurt, I broke my shoulder and elbow, etc., I can't answer. The weeks following were kind of blurry. Like I can't remember what I did or how long I spent recovering. I missed out on the whole summer. It's basically just a huge blur to me. Next story. I've had medical treatments that resulted in me losing chunks of memory from before the treatments. I obviously didn't realize I'd lost those memories until someone told me. I still occasionally find out about old parts of my life that now I don't recall. Generally, my immediate reaction when someone says to me, for example, "No, you've been here before, 3 times. Or, "Your brother really did live in Japan for a year." Or, "We've had this car for almost 5 years. It's not new," is that I don't believe them. I still, despite knowing that I've lost bits of my memory and past, think they must be joking or mistaken. The event or person or place that they remember simply no longer exists for me. It always takes me a while to accept that, at which point I shrug it off and try not to think about it too much. Next story. Just a few days ago, I was kicked in the back of the head when a scrum collapsed playing rugby, and I instantly blacked out. I then remember waking up and lots of people crowding around me and saying things, but I couldn't figure out what they were saying. I recognized the words, but I just couldn't understand any of them put together. It was terrifying. The only consistent thing I could remember was the pain itself, but not why it had happened or where I was. After someone called an ambulance, my memory worked in like snapshots. So I remember getting in an ambulance, a paramedic asking if I could follow his hand with my eyes, and then arriving in hospital, but then very little else until yesterday. I had the sudden moment of clarity and recognized what had happened and could finally understand what everyone was saying and doing. Overall, a terrifying experience. Next story. My SO fell off her horse at the beginning of this year quite bad. Luckily, I was there and immediately got an ambulance on the way. Took them 30 to 40 minutes for them to arrive. I was holding her head as still as possible, and for the first 20 minutes, she was completely non-responsive. Then she opened her eyes but couldn't speak till the ambulance got there. The next week or so after that, she forgot everything from the moment she hit her head onwards. The amount of stuff I had to repeat, sometimes every minute, was painful. She still doesn't remember anything from that week or two, which worries me, as she doesn't realize what she did to herself and isn't going to think twice about it. Next story. I have literally no memory of my life before 14 or 15. I had an emotional break. I was attacked, and I remember the attack, unfortunately. I've tried and only gained back 2 very disjointed, and honestly, unless they've been confirmed, I'd have thought they weren't real, memories. I did keep diaries when I was younger, but they just read how you would expect a child to write. Am I me is the big question. It was hard. And unfortunately, I went through an extremely rough time. I tried to take my own life, and I prayed for death for about 4 years. I had other problems. My father didn't believe in psychological care and tried to discipline it out of me. It failed. I didn't know who I was. I was living with strangers, and they wondered why I didn't feel close to them. I don't think I'll ever be comfortable with who I am. I was told I was a happy child, though my diaries kind of say I stopped being happy at least 2 years before the attack. I'm still suffering with a depression. However, I'm not sure if it's related. My immediate family has passed on now. Next story. Probably late to the amnesia party, but when I was doing chemotherapy a couple of years back, I had to take corticosteroids to keep my immune system working. Unfortunately, they also made me psychotic when I was weaned off the meds each cycle. Not like mad all the time psychotic, but temporarily clinically insane psychotic. The first time I started being unable to form new memories. I remember my brother showing me a video he found on YouTube of us at a Matt and Kim show, and then I just remember being in the emergency room at UCLA. I don't remember anything in between. It was like someone had pressed next chapter on a cosmic DVD player. I don't even remember being panicked. You kind of just autopilot into whatever you were currently doing, even though you don't remember how you got there or why. I remember asking a couple of questions to a nurse who observed me and being adamant that I was fine. But my dad said, "He's lucid now, but watch." Then it was mid-afternoon and I was in a hospital bed, midway through Forrest Gump on the small television over some medical supply cabinets. I remember a small understanding of what was happening was starting to form in the back of my mind. Something was very wrong. Unable to understand or cope, confused and lost, I cried in the hospital bed as Bubba died on the small hospital TV. I slowly fell back into things, but my memory is spotty about it. I remember moments and feelings, but other than that, I don't remember most of the ordeal. Chemo brain didn't help either. Next story. Okay, so mine was pretty minor, but still, well, it's hard to describe. Short version. I accidentally drank an entire pint of Everclear when I was about 19 years old. My last memory of that night was the world turning black and white and then passing out. I won't talk about what I apparently did while blacked out because I don't remember any of it, and only have second and third-hand accounts of my tomfoolery. What I do remember was the next morning. I woke up in bed and I didn't know where I was. More importantly, I realized I didn't know who I was. That realization was huge. I knew that somehow everything about the world was on the other side of that one thing, who I was. I didn't panic. I wasn't hurt or hungover, don't ask. I heard the details of me being made okay later. I actually felt great though, except I had no knowledge of anything. It was like the entire world was new, only I could feel that I should know things, and if only I could remember who I was sure everything else would come with that. I have no idea how long I just sat there on the edge of my bed, looking around, groping inside myself for any anchor to grab onto, but it ended all at once. Suddenly I knew who I was, and with that, all my memories and knowledge came flooding back to me, along with my realization of self. It was really humbling, realizing that I'm one brain injury from not existing as myself. I don't know why this made me think of this, but the way OP described it sort of feels like being on the guest account of a computer. Like you don't have access to most things, but if you can find the password and get into the main account, then you're golden, everything comes back. But until then, you have only the, ghost of the computer, or more accurately, the very basic outer layer. To get any deeper, you're missing that key thing. Next story. When I was young, maybe 5 or so, I woke up without any memory. At the time, I could tell something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what, so I never mentioned it to anyone. To this day, it was still my earliest memory, and I still have no idea what happened. The strangest thing is, I didn't remember how to sleep. I thought when you closed your eyes, you were supposed to hold your breath, so for a while I slept with my eyes open. Looking back on it, it's much more worrying than I was at the time, and I wish I knew what happened or what caused it, because when I think about it, I worry about it happening again someday. Next story. I have a seizure about every 2 years for no known reason. The first time I was 7 years old. I was at the top of a staircase about to walk down when I had a grand mal seizure. I seized down the whole flight of stairs, bumping my head a lot along the way. When I finally came to hours later at the hospital, I couldn't remember anyone. My mom was standing next to my bed, and the doctor explained what happened and asked if, quote, I knew who this lady is. I guessed she was my teacher. When she started to cry, I knew I was wrong. It was terrifying being a little girl without a clue of who my mom even was. To top it off, we were on vacation in a foreign country, so everyone was talking funny. To say I was scared is a huge understatement. Thankfully, not long after leaving the hospital and getting back to my aunt's where we were staying, I fell asleep, woke up, and everything came back to me. Next story. Got a concussion running out to meet my mom. The ground was covered in ice and I fell and went under the car. On the way to the hospital, I asked where we were going every 5 minutes or so. All I remember, though, is waking up in the hospital with a dry throat. It was weird. Didn't seem to have a lasting effect. Anyway, I got a concussion running out to meet my mom, and the ground was covered in ice, and I fell and went under the car. Wait. I've said this already. Next story. Not me, but my wife. She had a seizure a few years back while waking up. The shaking woke me up immediately. Called the ambulance as I've never experienced something like this before. She couldn't remember who I was, and trying to convince her as a random person to get in the ambulance was near impossible. Even though she was insanely sore from the convulsions, she put on makeup for 20 minutes before leaving with the medics. We get to the hospital and are going over the paperwork that the nurses need, like social security number and address and whatnot. She could not remember her social security number, but could remember the card was in her purse and pulled that out. She couldn't remember who I was either still by this time. I asked for her phone password to call her parents and she could type that in. It was just weird to me, with her remembering certain things and not others. Very heartbreaking as a husband not being remembered. We were in our early 20s and had been married in nearly a year. All I could think of is how this crap only happens in movies. I had just seen that Channing Tatum movie like a month before that. My wife ended up getting her memory back later that evening while still in the hospital. Other things came back to her in time, like memories of our honeymoon. We went out together to see a movie the night before this happened, and she still to this day can't remember it. I thought stuff like this was just not real, as it's hard to wrap my head around it, but trust me, it is. Next story. I've had a total of 8 concussions in the last 5 years of my life, and I'm living with permanent brain complications due to my injuries. Sometimes I have really bad short-term memory loss that has really affected my college studies. My most recent accident was a skateboard incident. I fell and hit my head on the ground, lost consciousness, and had a seizure. When I woke up, I didn't remember my name or where I was. I went to the hospital via my friend's car, and 6 hours later, my memory started to return. It was quite the scary experience. Doctors tell me I shouldn't hit my head anymore. Narrator's commentary. Wow, OP, you don't say. 8 concussions in 5 years? Why are you trying to collect them? Collect something normal. Like I promised, collecting Pokemon cards will be way less painful than collecting concussions. Just try it. Next story. I had a psychotic break after going off pain medication after a year of being dependent on it. Start to finish, I estimate that I was in a different reality for about 2 months. Now, when I look back, those months are mostly empty space. The best way I can describe the psychosis is that it was like planting mental magic beans and trying to hang on for dear life while I watched a new belief system grow spontaneously overnight. There were a few key things that I held as lifelines, but for the most part, these new beliefs were mercurial and would shift and change from existential bliss to nihilistic horror in the space of 5 minutes if I just watched the wrong movie. I learned to time travel and experienced people watching my life through remote viewing. The only thing that's lasted is the burned out skeleton of the belief system. I can recall certain moments and objects, going with my mom to get her car fixed and telling her that I thought my teenage sister was at risk for being mentally infected by a webcomic she was obsessed with, being hospitalized and screaming at the nurse to tell the social worker that my name is Mary. It's not. Feeling safer when I wore a certain hat, trying to befriend the secretary app on my phone, crying on the phone as my long-distance boyfriend demanded that I tell him what was going on in my head and panicking because I couldn't say it out loud, believing people were listening to me, reading articles on The Onion and being certain they were written about me, shutting out all media that involved words for fear of infection, little bits and pieces of actual life while this very rich good versus evil drama played out in my head night and day, and I just kept reading David Foster Wallace and trying to tell myself it would be okay if I just managed to jump into a safer universe. Nowadays, I know those memories are there. They felt erased at first, nothing but blank space. Then I started to be caught off guard by something reminding me of this time in my life that I'd somehow managed to protect myself from the memory of. If I try hard, I can access these things, but it's a lot of focus for things I'm not sure I really should remember. Most of the time, I just see things in movies or music that illuminate that old, burned-out belief structure that's still towering there in my mind, irrelevant by choice, but still there, still trying to be seen and lived in again. Next story. 2.5 months with retrograde amnesia after hitting my head on a bench, and after years of concussions from sports. Memories came back in chronological order. Childhood memories first, then middle school, high school, and so on. Only have a blank space of about 2 weeks. I've seen so many descriptions here that perfectly explain it in so many different ways, but I have always described it as near constant deja vu. A place, a person, an object, anything really might have had meaning for me, but I just couldn't place it. I would see family friends or my friends' parents and not have a clue why I knew that person. There was no reference point or connections to be made, even if that person had a more significant role in a certain time of my life. The craziest part, and the part my mother loves telling the most, was that for about a week after I fell, I had no preferences. I went grocery shopping with a friend, and I wouldn't be able to say if I liked something or not because I didn't know. So I would call my mom and ask her if I liked things as we walked through the store. I was also fairly suggestible, but luckily only by television. I was very wary of stuff people told me. I wanted to go to Quiznos because their commercial said the prime rib au jus sandwich was mouth-watering and delicious, and I found it to be lackluster in quality. To this day, I still refuse to eat there because I feel they lied to me in my vulnerable state. TLDR, amnesia is like deja vu, and Quiznos advertising misled me into no longer being a customer. Next story. I had a bad concussion playing rugby league at school. I have only a few memories of the week before the incident, and only a small idea of the next 3 days. I apparently had recurring amnesia, which was quite annoying for my friends who had to explain where I was and what had happened over and over again. I had some slight brain swelling that had worried the ER docs. My most vivid memory was pacing in an unknown room that I now know was my sister's spare bedroom sometime after. It was very early, I'd say close to dawn, and I remember the overwhelming feeling of restlessness and confusion. Afterwards, it was incredibly scary not knowing what had happened or where I had been. However, over time, I've accepted the fact. Long term, however, I honestly believe it has affected my concentration at school and my memory skills. To this day, I don't feel like I'm as capable academically as I was before. Next story. First and foremost, I want to let you know I didn't recover, per se. To this day, I cannot remember anything prior to the following. I had amnesia, I believe, as it was never officially diagnosed, December 30th, 1984. I remember every single moment of that day with total clarity, from waking up to running down the stairs in a panic not knowing what was going on, jumped the first and last stairs, to meeting my parents for what I then and to this day remember as the first time. I remembered how to talk. I was a child, so vocabulary-wise it wasn't exactly a lot to remember. I obviously knew how to work my body. I also felt that wearing clothes was a thing I needed to do. I worried about my nails as they were a bit dirty. I remember my mother walking down the stairs when I was in the living room, breathing heavily, looking around trying to get my bearings and figure out what was happening. I wasn't scared, I was confused. My mother started talking to me about running on the stairs and said she was going to make breakfast. I knew what breakfast was, but I didn't understand what the word meant. I knew breakfast was food, but not when, or what kind, or type. After eating, I was told to get dressed. My clothes were in my room. I assumed my room was the one I came from, and sure enough, clothes on the bed, green corduroy trousers and a red Le Shark t-shirt, a pair of thick sports socks, and simple white underpants. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm from Europe. I got dressed and found some toy cars to play with in a plastic box. I played with them under my bed. I didn't think anything of the problem of not remembering stuff as I had become distracted. My mother then came and took me to my great aunt's house, and she scared the living hell out of me. Now, this woman died a few years ago in her late 80s, so I'm assuming she was late 50s to early 60s at this time. I could not understand what was wrong with her face. It was saggy and droopy. I remember going to my great aunt's every Sunday, bar a few, in the 20 years that followed for what came to be known as Sunday lunch. For US, Think Thanksgiving with chicken, not turkey, and Yorkshire puddings and gravy for a starter. We're only up to about 8 a.m., so I'll cut to the chase here. Basically, I never let on to anyone that this happened at all. Later in life, a doctor told me I have blunted emotions, is the best way I can describe it. I can't find the clinical term even on the Googs, and they can't pinpoint why, but it's most likely due to a significant event in my life. The gist of it is I've experienced being frustrated and confused before, but never happy, sad, angry, etc. I just have a total lack of feeling. Let me also say that I know what to do acting-wise to make people think I'm feeling these emotions, and I get what people look and act like when they are, although I overdo the head laughs and smirks a bit in the wrong places, I think. In addition, I've never once in my entire life, after that day, obviously, been offended by anything. I assume this is part of the amnesia, but I can't be 100% sure. TLDR, most likely had amnesia, never recovered, not too bothered by it or anything. Next story. I had a major snowboarding fall when I was 16. Ended up taking an ambulance down from the mountain against my will. I didn't lose everything, but for a few days, huge chunks were missing. Like the lodge called my brother, and I remembered having a brother and his name, but I couldn't remember my name or where I lived or where I was. The weirdest, possibly most zen part of this was for several hours, I had no sense of self. Not remembering my name or anything about myself besides small things. Brother, yes. Bagel, breakfast. Pen, left hand. Kind of turned me into an absorption machine, a passive observer in the world. It's hard to describe what it was like, but I remember several hours later it almost being a shock to the system to once again think I, me, my terms. After my bell was a little less rung, going back to school was interesting. There were parts of the previous week, annoyingly, trig and French mostly, that were just gone. Like I could look at my homework and see an equation or sentence, know for a fact, because I trusted my teachers not to lie to me like that, this was something I knew and grasped, and it just wasn't there. It was like mentally thinking there's another step on the stairs every single time. A few faces and names left me for a while as well, but that wasn't as difficult for some reason. New people don't bother me either, as myself or a passive concussion zombie. I feel like 90% of the things I hear about snowboarding are accidents. I know this is a little off topic, but this seems like a dangerous freaking pastime. You're telling me you pay a ton of money to go out to a mountain, a ton of money to stay there, rent equipment or have your own, which also costs a lot, and then go down a hill really fast and sometimes hit your head and lose your memories? Obviously, I know this is an exception. I'm just kidding. But I don't know. The deal doesn't seem that good to me. Next story. Currently dealing with this myself. Apparently, I developed adult epilepsy and started having seizures. I was a machine operator at a steel processing plant when the bad one happened. I remember working running parts just fine. Then, in the blink of an eye, I was in an ambulance with EMTs getting questioned. I was freaked out to say the least. Apparently, I kind of just locked up and fell face first onto the concrete, and then my foot pedal was a brake press operator, fell on top of my head with other stuff. It was an extremely traumatic experience for me. I tried to go back to work and was on my lunch break and had another one. Didn't make it back to work. I fell out at a restaurant. I almost bit my tongue in half in them and was foaming at the mouth from where I just stopped breathing. Now I'm going from living on my own with a nice life for the past 5 years to having to move back in with my parents. I can't work. I can't drive until the doctor clears me. I can't swim or take baths. I'm pretty much dependent on people after being completely independent and proud of it. It's defeating. I have the feeling people will treat me like damaged goods now, and I'll never be able to hold much of a job again. Nobody will want to have me as a liability on their hands, probably. And more on the memories. I can sit there and talk with a person for an hour and then just repeat the conversation over and over. I have to look at my Facebook and phone gallery and Instagram to see what types of stuff I was into. I get random memories that come back from time to time. I've watched Always Sunny in Philadelphia a million times since season 1, but I can't catch any reference now, and every time I watch, it's like the first time. It's like stream of consciousness at best. It's just on its own. I can't pick out a memory and relive it. I had to relearn my social security number. I couldn't remember the address where I lived, my phone number, things that had been the same for a long time. What I think is the most terrifying is I lost the things that make me who I was as an individual. I'm like, what kind of foods do I like? What do I do for fun? I was a musician and videographer, and I can't really do things like that anymore because I just don't remember how it works. I swear I've eaten Taco Bell before, but I can't remember what it tastes like. It's very, very weird to say the least. I'm just glad I'm not paying student loans for an education I can't remember. Hey, you know what? I think if you get knocked on the head real hard and can't remember a thing about it, you shouldn't have to pay those loans. That wasn't the you now that made them. Look, I know that's a financial logistic nightmare, whatever. I'm just saying, I feel like that's a strange situation. Like you might have people who have grudges against you and you don't remember what you did, or even the opposite. People who love you and you can't remember why. This whole thread has been kind of terrifying, but really interesting. The human brain is a complex and very fragile thing, huh? Anyway, that's the last story for now. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.